Dr. Saravanamuttu is no stranger to Sri Lanka's media landscape. I wanted to get your personal view of this government's. We have a good idea of where they're heading and how direction they're going.
I recognize that they said that they have to work within the framework of the IMF. And the big question is, where is growth going to come from? We are now 4 months into this. 6 months, a year. If things don't get better, I think for the mass of people, you might have the open demonstration.
Like Darugale.
The problem that the JVP-NPP government has is not outside. It's within. And therefore, it's going to be international warfare. And blood gets spilling. And I hope and wish and pray that this will never happen. But it could get.
Do you think it's because of an absence of a strong opposition?
At the end of the day, any healthy functioning democracy needs a strong opposition.
So I keep on hearing the grassroots. In the Rajapaksa Mahathya form vela hitiyana melahaka daanduwa perlala. What do you think the Sri Lankans are now done with?
Kumara Dissanayake has a personal following at this time. He is, at one level, the only leader that we can. Remove him from the scene and put him on the side. Who else is there? Sirpal Rajapaksa. He's the only potential leader on the other side. Sajid has lost that moment. He hasn't exhibited that hunger and thirst to do something about it. And in the country at large. The Indian projects are really sort of focused on the North. The North will get fortunate in that economic sphere. What is the South of Sri Lanka?
Hello and welcome to Hard Knocks. I'm Kusum and this is Rehan. And we want to introduce the first guest on our first show. Dr. Saravanamuttu is no stranger to Sri Lanka's media landscape. He is of the Center for Policy Alternatives, a former diplomat, I would say an academic. And so, Dr. Saravanamuttu, thank you very much for being here with us. We really appreciate your time. The weather's not ideal. So we wanted to start just on a general tone. We wanted to get your personal view of this government's very short performance. It's been 4 months, but we've had a budget. We had 3 or 4 months ago, they had their vote on account where they decided on the tax revenues. So we have a good idea of where they're heading and how the direction they're going. Would you like to comment on that particular direction now that we have the budget?
Yes. First of all, I was never a diplomat.
You served as part of the UNHRC mechanism too?
No, not part of it. I went and lobbied them.
Right.
I lobbied them to bring a resolution on Sri Lanka.
That's engaging in diplomacy, I think.
All right, okay. All right, now, so what do I think of this government? All right, I was first cautiously optimistic in that it was a new face and all of that. And I recognize that they said that they have to work within the framework of the IMF. But the one thing that still bothers me with regard to this government is that, all right, a budget is with regard to annual expenditure and all of that, but it must be located within a strategic economic framework so that every year you move towards that goal. And the big question is, where is growth going to come from? Where is growth going to come from? I mean, you can talk about subsidies and welfare measures, etc., but there's no such thing as a free lunch. And they have to deal with that. And I suspect they are putting the blame or the onus of responsibility on the IMF, and they're doing their smoke and mirror stuff with regard to calling people to the CID. And of course, yes, if they've done wrong, they have to do all of that. But they are skirting the basic issue. There are fundamental questions that need to be confronted, and they need to do that. I mean, for example, with what? We have a 1.4 billion public service. Now, that's unsustainable. And what is the government saying? They are going to take in some 30,000 new people because the ones who are there don't have the capacities, the capabilities to do the job that they're supposed to. Where is this money going to come from? Wouldn't they be better, all right, you don't sack them overnight, but come up with some kind of plan where you either retrain them or put them into a labor pool, whatever, so that we can confront the issues of the future in terms of, I mean, I'm not saying that, you should have a sort of Elon Musk type attitude towards it, but it is huge, it's bloated, and you do not get that down. At least as far as the military is concerned, they've continued with Ranil Wickremesinghe's plan to bring it down to 130,000, 100,000 by 2030. But the rest of it?
I mean, Dr. Saravanamuttu, before we come to the growth aspect, I want to ask about the cost of living, and Rehan knows a lot about this because from the grassroots, he knows about the cost of living challenges. What do people say about how are they going to manage forward? What does the budget do for them in terms of this main crisis in our country right now?
No, so Kusum, I basically think that, and I need to put this across to Dr. Saravanamuttu as well. Doctor, one thing is that the people of this country, NPP sold this rhetoric where they said they were going to give freebies during the budget or something to that effect. Something to that effect. But they went along with the kind of budget that the SJB would have presented or Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe as president would have put forward. But now, we see that they have to go along the IMF program. But my question to you is, now, what if they gave the freebies, our economy would have collapsed. But now, isn't this the sort of budget that is expected right now? Or do you think that it could be better than what they offered? Or do you think this is what we need to do because we need to go with the IMF program?
Well, I mean, there are two schools of thought with regard to that. There are those who say that, yes, we could have negotiated a better deal with the IMF, and the SJB, for example, has made that argument. But no one is saying that we should turn our backs on the IMF as far as that's concerned. If we turned our backs on the IMF, there would have been a certain amount of economic and political turmoil in this country, and that was to be avoided at all costs. That's my take. I mean, some people will say, look, no, that wouldn't have been the case, but that is the case. Now, why are people enduring the cost of living under the NPP? 4 months since they formed the government. Not one piece of legislation has been passed on anything. Yeah, they talk the talk, but don't necessarily walk the walk. They don't seem to have an idea of how to implement. And sometimes when you listen to them, you sort of still feel that they still feel that they're an opposition party. Got to pinch them.
Absolutely.
So the population as well, who voted for them in such big numbers at the end of the day in the general election, also, when one looks at social media in particular, surely and not so slowly, they're turning against them. And we are now 4 months into this. 6 months, a year, if things don't get better, I think for the mass of people, you might have the open demonstrations.
Like Darugale.
However, I hope and pray that this won't be the case. But if it was to be like the Aragale that has happened would have been a tea party. Because the problem that the JVP-NPP government has is not outside. It's within. And therefore it's going to be internecine warfare. And blood could get spilled. And I hope and wish and pray that this would never happen. But it could get to a situation like this if the cost of living point does not change. Also, they are the first party to have won in the North and all of this kind of rhetoric and all of that. If that doesn't change, the cost of living, the day-to-day problems, they're going to lose all those seats, I would imagine. So, it's about coming up with not just a vision alone, but with a plan of action. Because that's where the problem is. They don't know how to implement. Maybe they're talking to who they consider to be experts, etc. And I don't know what's coming out of it.
Dr. Saravanamuttu, this is like JVP is a Marxist-Leninist party.
Traditionally.
The NPP is a left progressive party, right?
They are the distinction between the JVP and the NPP.
I mean, they do. I'm following what they do. Let's take their framing. I don't want to go into it. Well, Dr. Haridni Amrasuri, I think, roughly embodies what they think the NPP is. A left progressive, a mildly pink I mean, I suppose, yeah, she's one, but okay. But I don't need to make that argument. Right. But my point is more the lines of their manifesto, their rhetoric, their discourse was all about inequality. And Sri Lanka has always had inequality, fine. It got much worse. Let's say poverty doubled, the rate of poverty, number of people in poverty, child poverty, all these things, malnutrition, all these things are. This is their bread and butter. Even the rhetoric has disappeared, Dr. Saravanamuttu. Don't you agree? I mean, am I extrapolating here? I feel it's completely gone, and that's disappointing for me, I think.
No, I mean, basically, things look very different when you're in government.
Yeah.
And to the extent that they recognize that when they were in opposition, they deliberately misled the people. Deliberately misled the people, or they didn't have an idea as to how serious the problem was. On both counts, it's a minus, quite frankly. You come in with 159 seats in Parliament, and did you not think that you may have had the opportunity to form a government? Did you have plans? Here we are going into committee after committee. And what's going to come out of it? Again, we have the so-called low-hanging fruit.
Yes.
And we have the promises that were made with regard to, Adani, then with regard to the Online Safety Act, with regard to the PTA, all of that. What's happening? They're taking one hell of a long time to do anything about it if they are going to do something about it. And look, I mean, things like the Online Safety Act and the PTA, if things go bad for the government in power, these are very handy instruments to have to basically, let's be perfectly frank, control the population.
Dr. Saravanamuttu, I just want to jump in and ask you a question. Now, do you think that the reason the NPP has governed for 4 months and the reason they're getting even the past that they're getting now from the people, do you think it's because of an absence of a strong opposition?
Oh, yes. I mean, look, at the end of the day, any healthy functioning democracy needs a strong opposition. There is no opposition, quite frankly, at the present moment to this government. If there is going to be an opposition, it's going to have to come from civil society unless the opposition gets its act together. There is no proper critique of what's going on. So, yeah, they're having a field day because they don't have a strong opposition to contend.
Where does the opposition go from here? Sorry, where does the opposition go from here? What do you think?
Well, the opposition has to decide, are they going to be, and here I'm referring to the SJB and the UNP, are they going to be two parties or one party? They have to get over their personal differences and decide that. Then they have to go to the grassroots and organize. Because let's face it, the UNP's grassroots organization is not effective at all. The SJB may still have a grassroots organization, but it hasn't the inspiration, the thirst, the hunger to get into power. So you have to come up with a clear critique which the Mahajanata will understand as to why you are opposing this government. And then build on that critique into much larger policies, etc. But you have to define yourself against this government and for something.
Doctor, do you think, because one rhetoric that we keep on hearing, or I keep on hearing the grassroots, is that they say in Sinhala, Mahinda Rajapaksa Mahatya form vela hitiya nam melahaka daanduwa peralala. Now, this is coming after they were accused of bankrupting the country. So don't you think, Doctor, that because of the absence of opposition and the ineffectiveness of the current government, that this is also paving the way for another dynasty of Rajapaksa politics, or do you think the Sri Lankans are now done with it?
Well, look, Anurakkumara Dissanayake has a personal following in this country. And let's face it, he is, at one level, the only leader that we have. Remove him from the scene and put him on a side. Who else is there? It's Namal Rajapaksa.
That's what I was trying to get at.
Yeah. It's Namal Rajapaksa. And you can land Namal Rajapaksa in jail. That'll only increase his political prospects, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it if he's guilty of X and Y. But He's the only potential leader. On the other side, Sajid has lost that moment, if you like. He hasn't exhibited that hunger and thirst to do something about it, and in the country at large.
If I were to just touch on the votes in the north, because I think you mentioned this in your first answer. Yes, they won the north and east in the general election. If they don't deliver on the economy, I assume they were voted in, primarily their votes were from the north and east due to the economy, due to their promise of changing things. Anti-corruption, reconciliations is also there, but let's say it was an economic vote. If they don't deliver, how long before the political question becomes more in vogue in the north and east rather than the economic question? And also, how does the NPP government manage the the Tamil nationalist wing, which has always been for a federal model, which some say is extra constitutional, versus the NPP JVP, which has been weirdly against the 13th Amendment, at least until this most recent election cycle. How are they going to balance those two?
Look, let me give you my take on this. The last general election in India returned the Lok Sabha, which has to decide on delimitation. Now, delimitation is largely decided on population. Right. And we know that the states outside the south have a much bigger population than the southern states. So they are going to get that many more seats. Now, the South Indian states have always believed, and there is a large element of truth in this, I think, that they have subsidized the rest of India. Right. Now, 10 to 15 years down the line, if that continues, I won't be surprised if the South Indian states, Southern Indian states, come up with the call for confederalism, not secession. And by that time, India will be the fastest growing economy in the world, an economic, maybe a political superpower as well, or whatever. So India will be on the up, and the South will be the part of that country which is going to be right at the top. Now, when you look at the development projects in Sri Lanka, the Indian projects are really sort of focused on the north. When this gets going, if I'm right, and this gets going, the north will get caught up in that economic sphere. So, and why not? Greater prosperity, all of those things. Turning our backs on it is ridiculous. So now, what does the south of Sri Lanka do? Does the south of Sri Lanka stand on its hind legs and whinge about economic sovereignty?
Does it become a Chinese satellite?
Does it become a Chinese satellite? What does happen? So those are questions I think that any government needs to look at, because things move very fast.
And do you worry that any idea of federalism, any talking of this, is that just awakening the ultranationalist wing and giving them more legs and emboldening them?
No, that's because they will come up with all the distortions, etc., about federalism. But I remember when in 2001 and all of that, when the idea came up, and when they said that, no, it was in 2004, where at the peace talks they said that they were going to explore the possibility of a solution along federal lines. We used to go around the country trying to tell people what is federalism. And the first question that people would ask was, yes, that seems to be a good idea. What is it? What is in it for us? And then when you explain that you will have to make your own decisions in terms of whether you need a hospital here, you don't have to come to Colombo to decide that, they were thrilled. So all the decisions that you can't make locally, then it'll go higher up in the chain. So hopefully, if that demand is made, yet again, the people will not see it as breaking away or whatever. But the point here is this, is that AKD and the NPP government are following Ranil Wickremesinghe's policies for reconciliation. And that is, reconciliation comes through economic development. Underlying that is, of course, a big dose of amnesia.
Dr. Saravanamuttu, I would like to ask this question to you in Sinhala, and you'll understand why after I ask you. ලංකාවේ ඩොක්ටර් බහුතරයක් හැබැයි මහජාතිය කියලා කියන්නේ සිංහල ජාතිය කියලා තමයි මේ ලංකාවේ කියන්නේ. දැන් ඔබතුමා මූලික කාලේ ඉඳන්, ඒ කියන්නේ මට මතක කාලේ ඉඳන් ඔබතුමා CPA එක හරහා ලංකාවේ උතුරු නැගෙනහිර විතරක් නෙමෙයි, ලංකාවේ තියෙන ස්වෛරීභාවයට නැත්නම් ලංකාවේ තියෙන ප්‍රජාතන්ත්‍රවාදයට යම්කිසි පහරක් එල්ල කරනවා. ඔබතුමාලා තමයි ඒක ගැන ඉස්සලම උසාවිය යන්නේ. මම මේක දන්නේ මොකද මම SJB එකේ ඉද්දී මම පෙත්සම් දානකොට ඔබතුමා මට කලින් පෙත්සමක් දාලා. ඒක දාන්නෙත් ඔබතුමා. හැබැයි ඔබතුමාට පොඩි චෝදනාවක් තිබ්බ ඒ කාලේ. මේ මහා සිංහල ජාතිය. ඔබතුමා මොන හරි දෙයක් කරපු ගමන් ඔය පටන් ගන්නේ ඩයස්පෝරාව. හැබැයි දැන් මොවුන් දන්නේ ඔබතුමාගේ සීයා තමයි ඔබතුමාත් මේක කියන්නේ. මම සමහරවිට බලනවා ඇයි ඔබතුමා මේක කියන්නේ නැති කියලා. ඔබතුමාගේ සීයා පී සරණිමුත්තු. ඔබතුමාගේ නම තියෙනවා පී සරා කියන ස්ටේඩියම් එක හදලා තියෙන්නේ එතුමාගේ නමින් පස්සේ. ඒතර ඔබතුමාගේ මව ලංකාවේ කලාංශයට වැඩිපුරම සේවයක් කරලා තියෙන නැත්නම් ඔය টপ 3 එක සේවයක් කරලා තියෙන මම කියන්නේ ඌස සරණමුත්තු, දිවංගත ඌස සරණමුත්තු මැතිණිය. එතකොට ඔබතුමාගේ නාති සහෝදරියක් නාති නැන්ද කෙනෙක් තමයි මනෝරාණි සරණමුත්තු. එතකොට රිචඩ් ඩිසොයිස කියන්නේ ඔබතුමාගේ නාති සහෝදරයෙක්. එතකොට ඔබතුමාගේ තාත්තා මම හිතන්නේ මේ රටේ හිටපු වැදගත් ශ්‍රේෂ්ඨයකට හිටපු කෙනෙක්. ඉතින් මම මේක අහන්නේ දොස්තර ඔබතුමාට ඩොක්ටර් මේ වගේ චෝදනා එනකොට. මොකද මට දැන් හිතෙනවා දැන් ඔබතුමාගෙන් පස්සේ ඔබතුමාගේ මේ වැඩ ටික ගෙනියන්න තවත් තරුණ පරම්පරාවක් ඉන්න ඕනේ. ඔබතුමා කොහොමද මේ චෝදනා කාගෙන ඉන්නේ? ඒ කියන්නේ ඔබතුමාට මොකද්ද දෙන්න පුළුවන් උපදෙස? කවදරි දවසක ඔබතුමාගෙන් පස්සේ අවුරුදු 20කින් CPA එක වෙන කෙනෙක් තරුණයෙක් බාර ගන්නවනම් මේව කොහොමද කාගෙන ඉන්නේ නැත්නම් ක්ලික් ස්කින් එකක් කොහොමද ඇති කරගන්නේ?
Well, මගින් විසින් උත්තර දෙන්නම්. There are a number of reasons why I don't make a big fuss about any of the things that you mentioned. And first of all, look, I mean, in terms of whatever my parents and grandparents did and all of that, if it is known, it is known. It's not for me to talk about it. It's for the rest of society to talk about it. When people make these allegations against me, they're giving me publicity. But I do not want to give them more publicity by contesting it.
Right.
And getting caught up in the courts where it'll go on forever and ever and ever. I think the important thing is to get on with the job that we have, no? The important thing is to pursue that. And despite, I think, CPA and I have proven that, look, you can throw sticks and stones and whatever it is at us, even death threats and all of that. But we are not going to stop. We are here.
Where do you get that motivation from, Doctor?
Well, I guess from my upbringing and whatever. But I don't know actually where exactly it comes from. I can't put a finger on it. But it's there within me. I mean, we have to keep
fighting.
Forging ahead. And irrespective of whether it's a left-wing or right-wing government or whatever it is, we want a society in which, there is the Israeli philosopher Avishai Margalit who wrote this book called The Decent Society. And he said, look, you have to have a society where institutions do not humiliate citizens. Right? I mean, we had the classic examples, where if a Tamil was caught in a traffic offense, he goes to a police station in Colombo, for example, and the policeman can't speak English or doesn't speak Tamil. So his statement is taken down in Sinhala, which he can't speak. So he has to sign it. And that stands in a court of law. That is absurd. So a society in which institutions do not humiliate citizens, and as important, where citizens do not humiliate each other. So that's what we want. And they can say all sorts of things. And my answer to the allegations with regard to you have made yourself rich as a consequence of provide the evidence, and then I will answer to that.
Dr. Saravanamuttu, just to stay on the issue of devolution and the war period, why I mentioned the diplomacy specifically was because you were featured tried prominently in a book, 2 books by Professor Rajiv Vijayasinghe. I've interviewed Dr. Dan Jaitilaka, and the 3 of you with a few others, I think, played a prominent role in lobbying for European nations to not withhold their resolution, but I think dilute that resolution. And you were successful. It's something that's sort of not really recognized in the wider sort of pop culture, so to say, because it was a big part of the war victory was getting the diplomatic space for that war victory. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? I feel like it's underappreciated.
No, I think the first thing with regard to what we did in Geneva and what we do with the diplomatic community and all of that is this, is that the resolutions out of the UNHRC are very often presented as resolutions against Sri Lanka. That's what I contest. They're resolutions on Sri Lanka. They're not against Sri Lanka. And we didn't go and lobby or anything like that against our country. We lobbied in the belief that if those resolutions came through and they were the demands or whatever were met, that we would have a much better country and our democracy and all of that would be a lot stronger. So I think there is a fundamental, it's a distortion of what we do, and perhaps that's there because there aren't sources of funding for the work that we do within Sri Lanka. So yes, we have to go abroad. Yeah. Now the argument therefore is that, look, they are doing someone else's bidding.
You're a surrogate.
So my argument against that is this, look, the government of Sri Lanka also goes and gets money from abroad. So are you saying that the government of Sri Lanka therefore does what the foreign government that is giving them money does? Look, I mean, as I said before, show us the evidence. The donors themselves know that we have an agenda of our own. It's a political agenda.
Yeah.
However, it is not an agenda where we are working for a political party or for a government. We work with them. And that's an important distinction to make. We set the political agenda in terms of putting out what our ideas of reform are. It's up to political parties to take them up. Now, in 2015, I guess some people in civil society felt that this was a wonderful opportunity for change, for transformation, and that an agenda that we had worked on and defended for a good 25 years, that they also needed to go into government to make sure that that agenda was fulfilled. And maybe some did succeed in some sort of way and some did not. Yeah. But the important thing to remember, I think, at the end of the day is this, is that we have an independent agenda. We are political, but we don't go and do things. We're not hired hand for any government or political party. I mean, for example, CPA came into existence in 1996. And from then to now, it was a sort of SLPP or SLFP government with few interregnums. We took each of those governments to court when we had to. We were told that we were Ranil Wickramasinghe's poodles or whatever and all of that kind of stuff. But the evidence is there.
If I can just one more question on the devolution issue. If I can play devil's advocate, if someone tells you the 13th Amendment has a flaw in the sense that you can argue it's an Indian imposition. Some would say we signed it under certain duress. I think cutting off the supplies to Jaffna and then the airdrop of the supplies, that kind of thing. So was there a certain amount of duress under which we had to sign the 13th Amendment? Do you think that's a weakness that maybe we should look at, that it becomes sort of this Indian export to our country? Is that something that, because that's the nationalist sort of highlight that they use, right?
There is no getting away from the fact that if the Indians weren't the both fathers and mothers of it, they were the godparents. And it came because India pushed it. Now, the issue here is this, is that why did India have to push it? Which government came up with a political settlement of this issue, which they then, when in government, which political party came up with a settlement, and which, when they were in government, they tried to implement. Those that did had severe opposition. The principal opposition party, both the UNP and the SLP, are guilty of this, But if you look at it at another level, in terms of the provisions of the 13th Amendment, there are issues. The balance of powers in the 13th Amendment are heavily weighted in favor of the centre. Okay? As some chief ministers have said, I can't even appoint a peon without central government permission. Yeah. Other thing is that you have this whole thing about national policy. National policy trumps everything else. So whatever powers that are given can be trumped by national policy, national education policy, or whatever. Okay? Thirdly, the president is the one who appoints the governor. The governor is the president's appointee, president's man or woman. So you can't do anything because the governor at the end of the day is the most important. He has to ratify this and that and whatever. So, if we go towards devolution, I think we have to look again at the 13th Amendment. But in the meantime, I think it is a good start. And let's face it, it's part of the Constitution. It's part of the Constitution.
Dr. Saravanamuttu, I always have this argument with Kusum, a very friendly sort of discourse, where I tell it point blank that it was the Sinhala majority that started this nonsense. And the reason I say that is because of the Sinhala Only Act and it's SWR Modabhimanayaka's position on it, what he did later, the burning of the Jaffna Library. So I sort of agree with the 13th Amendment, but one thing that I sort of think is that they should be given more power. And then people sometimes ask me, okay, then what about the rest of the country? But I say the rest of the country hasn't gone through what the North and East went through. Now, my very simple question to you is, if you had the authority to make decisions once and for all, bringing lasting reconciliation to this country, if you had a top 3 things that you would want to do, how would you solve this problem? Because we always talk about it, but no leader keeps on giving solutions. And my second part of the question is, you have known many leaders since the 1990s. CBK, Mahinda Rajapaksa, Ranil Wickremesinghe, Maithripala Sirisena. Has any of these leaders ever called you and told you, Sara or Doctor, we need your help to sort out this problem? Has there ever been that time? So my first question was, what are the top 3 things we can do to solve this issue? Okay. And my second part of the question is, have you ever got a call from a leader requesting you for your help?
Okay, let's take the top 3 things. The first thing I will do is abolish the executive presidency, because I think it is fundamentally an impediment to any kind of democratic progress in this country.
Right.
Okay? And we can go chapter and verse in terms of all the reasons why. But very simply, if you had, because of the executive presidency, no one could take on Gotabaya. He got away scot-free. So you had to go out on the streets to get him to go. Furthermore, talk about corruption. Every single secretary to the ministries are appointed by the president. They are the chief financial and audit officers of a ministry. They should be held responsible. And should the president have that power? Certainly not. So, definitely abolition of the executive presidency, move back to parliamentary democracy, institute a second chamber where you will have provincial representation as well. And also, if there is to be a law which would disproportionately affect a particular province, that has to be passed with a special majority by that province as well. So that power is diffused. The whole argument is power like water, you put it into your fist and you squeeze it and try to control it, it drips down. Yeah. So executive presidency, definitely. And in addition to that, a full gamut of constitutional reform where we will move to a mixed member proportional representation system where you'll have a constituency MP, and then if the party doesn't get the sufficient number of seats that they are supposed to according to the proportion of votes that they have polled, you top it up on a list.
Right.
And on that list, you have every other candidate a woman. So invariably, the number of women in parliament will increase. All right, so that is, well, there is another point with regard to constitutional reform, and that is, I will restructure the Attorney General's office. There is inbuilt contradiction that he or she represents the government in court and is responsible for prosecution. And the prosecutions are mostly have to be against government. So we need to...
So there's a fundamental flaw there.
Absolutely. So we need to break it up and have
An independent prosecutor's office.
exactly.
Yeah. That was in the manifesto as well.
Yeah. Okay, so that's one. Second one is that, look, it is high time that the truth was told to our people. And
what is that truth though?
okay, at one level, when you look at it, you have free education, you have free health, you get a job in the public service. There are no KPIs, no key performance indicators. You are there for life.
Yeah.
So you're looked after from home to tomb. I remember, I think, after the 2001, 2004, when the UNP government was in the cohabitation period, I think the World Bank or someone did a program for young graduates. And they said private sector will offer you greater salaries and all of that. So some people did that. In 2004, after the elections, when the new government came in, they all left and joined the public service. What? Security of tenure.
Nice.
Has anyone been sacked from the public service?
Shame.
Right. You know, so we have to tell our people that you can't assume that everything is going to be given to you. All these people who are criticizing the JVP, NPP government and saying that we should have not gone along with the IMF, etc., what is their alternative? Seriously, I mean, what is their alternative? I haven't seen anything that suggests they can come up with all the sloganeering and all of that. But we live in a particular world in which, yes, those Bretton Woods institutions still apply, and to go against them will take a lot of courage, not just a lot of courage, it'll take a lot of hardship as well. So I would start by, coming up with a policy by which we can reduce the public sector, but you just can't sack them and put them out there. Come up with retraining or something like that, which will give them the transition to another job. Thirdly, I would say yes, there is the national question. And the national question needs to be dealt with. Otherwise, every other area of success that you get in will be undermined, because this will be like a sort of sword of Damocles over your head. I would say I have no problem with federalism. I have no problem with giving power to the people, and what they cannot do at that grassroots level, then it goes up and up and up. Now, you can have a police force, but you will have a national police force as well. What is the problem? And if some provinces are doing better than others, that's competition and a damn good thing too. So those are the three things that...
And the second question?
Second question was...
have you got a call or have you got a request from any president of the country that you can remember requiring your help and assistance to solve this problem?
Okay.
I know you were part of the Office of Missing Persons at one point.
No, I wasn't.
Okay.
I'll tell you what it was.
Okay.
When CPA came into existence, the president was Chandrika, ending 17 years or whatever it was, or 11 years or whatever, of UMP rule. Things got along well. I mean, I wasn't an insider advisor or anything like that. But when things went badly wrong, was Wamber.
The violence of that election.
Yes. At 1:00 in the afternoon, I got a telephone call from Jayavikrama Pereira, who was the chief minister, saying, Doctor, they're stuffing ballot boxes, they're doing this, they're doing that, please do something. So we issued a statement, CMEV, Center for Monitoring Election Violence, saying, annul the election.
Annul it.
Annul it. It's a damn disgrace. From that point onwards, that government turned against us. Yeah, and they set up, there was Sripati Surarachi. Yeah, they set up some, I can't remember what it was called, and they said, CMEV is not the Center for Monitoring Election Violence, it's a Center for Manufacturing Election Violence. And they went out against us. Then they also tried to halt our funding. It was the Asia Foundation that was giving us funding at that time, and they said that that should not be the case. As a consequence, they had various negotiations, I think, with the US ambassador, and as a result, our funding base was widened because the Europeans and the Australians, the Canadians also came in. So that was the situation with regard to Chandrika's the first administration. The second one, I must say this, she was the only, and her government was the only government who came out with a solution, a proposed solution to the ethnic conflict.
The regions.
The Union of Regions, the August 2000 Constitution.
Right.
However, there was a problem about the interim arrangements. She wanted to be president for the full second term before any of this kicked in.
That's when Mr. Wickramasinghe burnt.
Yeah, which was an unpardonable thing to do, but nevertheless, that's what happened. So then from Chandrika we go to Mahinda. Now, Mahinda was shamelessly populist. And Mahinda's goal was to replace the Bandanakas and Senanakas as the big political dynasty. He was neither racist or anything like that. He just wanted to create the Rajapaksa legacy. And we had to tell him, had to say, look, that's just not possible. Then what happened is in 2009, our GSP, General Scheme of Preferences Plus, scheme was coming up for renewal. And we said, look, do the human rights stuff and we'll get GSP. It's a win-win situation. But of course, they unleashed the forces against us. And that's the time I got a death threat and I was stopped at the airport and all of that kind of stuff. So that was Mahinda. So that takes us up to 2015. So then we had the Yahapalanya government. And in the Yahapalanya government, to the extent that they played around with constitutional reform, etc., yes, they did talk to us. They did talk to us. We brought down experts from Norway and wherever to talk about, the MMP system, all of that kind of thing. They did talk to us. But talking to us is fine. The issue was, did they have the political commitment to do all of that? And that was a problem. So it was with the Ranil Wickramasinghe government at that stage. And then, of course, we opposed. When Sirisena put Rajapaksa in as Prime Minister, we had that sort of mini constitutional crisis and all of that. So we opposed them. But Gotabaya Rajapaksa, what do I say?
Circling back, because you mentioned a few things I want to touch on. You talk about institutions.
But one second, but Dr. still has to answer.
Oh, he's one left.
So basically you didn't, but my question to you was, did you receive a credible invitation from them to help out?
Well, as I said, the only ones who sort of spoke to us...
CBK.
No, not CBK. It was Ranil Wickramasinghe. And this government hasn't reached out to us.
And also during that period, I think 2015, I think this is something I wanted to ask you. We co-sponsored the resolution in Geneva.
Yes.
The UNHRC, 2015. That, I think, spoke about foreign judges in a local justice mechanism, which I think was a big, shall we say, it was controversial at the time. That's what the nationalists used to...
But look at the situation. Both the Prime Minister and the President agreed to send their Foreign Minister to make these proposals. And these proposals were first made in Geneva. They were not made in Sri Lanka. Okay. Now, presumably, Mangala Samaravira assumed that his President and Prime Minister supported him when he made the statement. The moment the words left his mouth, they all screamed and said, look, we're not going to allow our war heroes to be turned into war criminals. And, people say that there is a constitutional impediment and all of that nonsense. Absolute nonsense. And if there is a constitutional you have a two-thirds majority in parliament to pass it.
But I want to circle back because you mentioned institutions and you mentioned this current government. You mentioned the governorships as well. So there's a very powerful, very wealthy governor of the Western Province that's been installed by the government. And I think institutionally we have had many failures, whether it's a monetary board or the central bank, whatever you call it. How do you see, because if I am to understand their own manifesto and their own discourse correctly, they understood that governance was the central aspect that failed in Sri Lanka's collapse. So in that case, why do we have these situations where you have a very wealthy person who is the Western Province governor, or you have Sri Lankan Airlines, which now has a chairman who was a former director at Haley's, which also bid for the airline, right? Who the owner of Haley's, Mr. Damika Ferreira, is also a SLPP politician. He was going to be their presidential candidate, was on stage with the Rajapaksas, all that. So there's some sort of conflicts going on. So do you think this is really a new way of doing politics? Is this a change that you think?
I think that the NPP government has, in their sort of transformation from JVP into NPP, did make, reached out to a certain great capitalists and all of that, from the John Keels to whoever, because I think they felt that they needed to demonstrate benign intent, that they were not going after the capitalists, that they were not going after property tax here and whatever and whatever. So in that respect, I think they are very savvy politically. They're extremely savvy politically. I mean, they ran a very successful campaign when they were in opposition and won the presidency. But as I say, it's a different story now when you're in government. And that's what they have to get their heads around. But if there is a tussle between what goes for NPP and what goes for JVP, that is what the tussle is going to be. The NPP is going to want to deal with the capitalists and all of that, and the JVP is not. So it's a question of, do leopards change their spots?
Yep. And Dr. Saravanamuttu, my closing question to you. But first of all, I would like to thank you because this is our first ever show. And Kusum and I both decided it was a mutual decision that we're somehow going to get you on the show.
Well, I hope you were right. In any case, all the best.
And we had a great conversation with you. And I'm sure Kusum wants to ask you a closing question as well. My closing question to you is, if you have a bit of advice that you need to give the NPP government and the opposition at this critical juncture of our time, what would that be?
Well, as far as the opposition is concerned, I will say look at the challenges facing this country. Put your personal differences aside and come up with a unified oppositional force to take on the government, critically constructive or constructively critical. You don't have to hammer away at them at everything that they do. There are certain things that they've done which need to be applauded. Yeah, that is certainly the case. As far as the government is concerned, they need to come up with a national economic strategy. And I say economic because that's the main thing, that a national economic strategy with a plan of action, and communicate that to the Mahajanata. They can't just have it in private. They have to communicate it because at the end of the day, I mean, what was the article? It was about the loss of trust in government at the end of the day. So that's what I'll say. You come up with a plan of action. And, I always thought that they would hit the road running. But it's 4 months. And not a single piece of legislation has been passed with 158 seats in Parliament. It's almost like a waste of 158 seats, in that sense. They could pass legislation overnight,
So, Dr. Saravanamuttu, I just want to echo what Rehan said and say thank you very much. Very thankful for your time. And I'll close with, I know you probably don't like to do this, but if you could speculate in the next year, because we've seen this government in the campaign season, they waved around a lot of files. So do you see some major arrests coming up? Do you see anything that we should, as a population, as a populace, should we look forward to some justice for, let's say, the economic collapse, the VFS scam, the sugar scam, anything?
I think for the elections of 2024, there were two issues. One was a question of accountability, and the accountability was largely in terms of the financial dimension. And the other one, I think, was, you had to sort of restore trust. We had to redesign the social contract for this country because everything is in shambles. So now, the Mahajanatava, as it were, they expect, I think within a year, that some big fish is behind bars. Now, the thing with regard to that, of course, is that we shouldn't come up with extrajudicial mechanisms to do that. We need to go through the due process of the law and put a big fish behind bars. Then the others will follow. The others will follow. We need to do that, and then, of course, to get the economy right in terms of alleviating the daily distress that people have with regard to 3 square meals a day, their children's schooling and education and health.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saravanamuttu. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Time.